we need to look at it as part of any other element of our sport, and it requires planning. I think you can't walk into an event or a regular Saturday competition without thinking about what do we actually need? What many bodies do we need to be there for this to come off? And what skill sets do we need? The same way you would plan for your workforce, you've got to plan for your volunteers. And I think that the biggest tip that I have with working with volunteers is respect. So many of them are treated poorly and treated as if they're not worth anything. You lose them instantly.
Meet Bron Parry. A lover of sport in general, Bron has spent her career striving to ensure that, like any good coach, her volunteers feel valued and part of a team. During this podcast, Bron and I chat about the important role that sport plays within a community and the opportunities this creates for engagement in the form of volunteering. We discuss the importance of acknowledging and valuing volunteers as part of the overall workforce and the strategies that can be employed to ensure that your volunteers are engaged and retained. We also discuss the impacts of COVID-19 on the workforce that surrounds and supports sports in Australia and around the world. As an operator of a contracting business herself, Bron talks about the importance of staying positive during these challenging times and how now, more than ever, we need to be flexible and open to new opportunities. This podcast was recorded remotely, so we do apologise for any broken audio at times. Here's hoping that these podcasts can be recorded in person sooner rather than later. We hope you enjoy the podcast. Hey, Bron Parry, thank you so much for joining us on the Engage Volunteer podcast. You've been someone we've wanted to have on, so you've got an incredible journey across sports, and I'd love to hear a bit about how you got into it to begin with, and then a bit of the journey you've been on since then.
Thanks, Shannon. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today, and my journey is an interesting one. It's a bit different. It's gone in a few different directions over the years. Certainly all started as a young kid playing sport that moved into coaching.
Where'd you grow up, Bron?
I grew up in Sale in East Gippsland.
Yep.
Girl.
Cool. So plenty of sport to be played out there.
Yeah, loved it. And I think,
great.
You can't get enough of it. And I think at the core of a lot of small country towns is the sports community and how well they sort of engage with the people in the town and a place to socialise and connect. So it's certainly a big part of my childhood. I had fairly simple career aspirations as a teenager. I just desperately wanted to be a PE teacher.
Fair enough. It's a good career, PE teacher.
Well, it's interesting.
We probably both look back on it.
Yeah, you kind of look at it, maybe as an assumption as a kid, you think they don't actually have to work too many hours. You only see them at school from, 9 till 3:30. But, I think as we grow older, we know how much the teachers do in terms of preparation and reports and dealing with behaviour and all that fun stuff. But I originally got into the University of Ballarat's PE course and decided to take a year off. So I took a gap year where I did outdoor ed at my school in Sale. Had a brilliant year, managed to get out and do a lot of skiing and hiking and canoeing and ended up with a trip to Nepal. So that's, once in a lifetime opportunity.
So you were sitting in the staff room as a
sitting in the staff room with a very different view of the world. Yeah. Lots of banter around, did you see this kid today? Oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
There's good stories in the staff room, that's for sure. But it just gave me a year to consider whether doing PE was the right move. And I think I came to the conclusion that it was going to pigeonhole me a little bit in that once I was doing PE, I was going to do it for a while. I think I thought, and this is no disrespect to any teachers, but I thought if I tried a different path and went a different course, then I could always sort of come back to teaching as an alternative, do a dip ed at some later stage. So that was my plan. I applied to get into sports coaching at Deakin University, which was David Parkin's course. I'd always pushed it away because I didn't think I was actually likely to get in. I only take 30 every year. And I think it was, again, an assumption made that only elite sports people were taken into the course. So I think once I delved a bit deeper and learnt more about it, realised there were a lot of people out there like me that loved sport, loved coaching, and wanted to see if that was going to be a career pathway to take. Loved my uni days, had a lot of fun and did a bit of learning along the way.
Yeah.
And
it's a fine balance that sometimes.
Very fine balance.
Certainly.
And I was one of the very few people out at the Deakin campus that didn't live with their parents. So I had a pretty relaxed uni days, and everyone would turn up at my house to get away from their folks. But
nice.
I think about halfway through my course, I sort of realised coaching, as much as I loved it, was probably more of a hobby than a profession. And I think out of the people that went through our course, a very small percentage, maybe only 10 or 20% sort of took that path and became professional coaches. It's a pretty tough market, and you have to be almost, an exceptional operator to sort of make a living out of it. And there's some great coaches that have come out of that course. So I wasn't alone in that sort of thinking. There's quite a few of us in my year level that wanted to sort of look at more sports management as an option. And I did consider switching across to the commerce degree halfway through, but I thought I'd see it out. We had conversations with people like David Parkin and some of our course coordinators around. We'd always done our practicum with coaching, and would it be possible to do practicum with our sort of admin and software?
Yeah, sure. So makes sense. Yep.
That opened up a lot of opportunity. I did I think quite a few of my hours at a few different places. One of them I remember fondly was the Victorian Women's Cricket Association, which now thankfully is all one organisation, Cricket Victoria, with men and women together. But back in the day, there was only, I think, one staff member, Claudia Fatoni, and we worked out of what felt like a dungeon at the time. It was downstairs at the old Cricket Victoria office, and I worked on umpire allocations for the weekend and fixturing and all this fun stuff, and started learning about the rules of cricket. And so I think that's probably we talk about volunteers and how important it is when you're starting your career to put your hand up and take opportunities and learn. That was a great one for me. I loved that opportunity. Sure. And
even though perhaps you didn't love cricket at the time, it was a job in sports and volunteering.
No, I think, and for me, I did love cricket, but I think what I've learned, and I encourage people, is don't pigeonhole yourself into one sport. So my sports playing was sort of more netball, softball, athletics. And again, we talk about country towns, but no opportunity there for playing or coaching male-dominated sports. It's very different now.
Yeah, I understand.
So coming to Melbourne, I felt some of those opportunities opened up a bit, and cricket was one of them, and AFL Aussie Rules was another. So that was sort of my journey into, starting at uni and working into the sports industry.
Yeah, awesome. Nice one. And then across your time since university, you've been on all different sides of contracting, consulting to sports. You've been employed directly by sports. A very quick question off the top, is there a side that you prefer?
Oh, interesting. I think the thing that stands out for when you're, being a consultant is the flexibility and variety that you get in your work. When you tend to work in an organisation, you tend to be in one particular area, and that's maybe where I sort of have the jack of all trades approach to the work I do, and have often sometimes thought, what would my career have been if I had specialised in one particular area? I think the part that you miss that you really get by working in an organisation is being part of a team and working towards a common goal. And I think that is a high motivator for a lot of people, including me, that you love working together to achieve something. You tend to find you're a bit isolated when you do it on your own.
Yeah, sure. I think the career you've had has exposed you to all different sides, which is so important to see. So that now when you manage contractors, now with your current role at CGA, I think it's a good intel to have, and even just from a relationship perspective and understanding of how people cope, and you probably learn some things there.
I was talking with a consultant yesterday who's working with Commonwealth Games Australia, and they've been working with this contractor for possibly nearly 2 years. And so, some of the questions I had was, is there an end date to what we're working on? Because I know that's hard for when you're consulting, moving from one project to the next, or feeling like you've closed off a project. So it was good that I was able to have that conversation, knowing that I'd been in that world before, to understand it fully. Yeah, I mean, there's pros and cons to obviously having an employee within your team that's working on something opposed to a contractor, and obviously get a bit of expertise or less overheads when you use a contractor at least. So,
yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And you've been on the event side as well as kind of the long-term side for sport and growing participation and so on. So it was the Commonwealth Games.
Yeah, so that was a goal I'd set myself during my uni days, that at that stage the Commonwealth Games had been awarded to Melbourne, so we knew it was coming.
Yeah.
It was back when, you had this really long lead in before a games actually occurred. And I got lost a little bit there. I sort of worked in the health and fitness industry, which I loved, we really enjoyed, but sort of took me away from where I thought my career was going to be going, and sort of brought myself back and fortunate enough to get a role at Commonwealth Games in 2006, and I was the event coordinator for basketball.
Yeah.
And that was quite a difficult role in that we had multiple venues. We were regional, so we had our preliminary rounds in 4 regional centres and then came back to Melbourne for the finals. So it was a big role in terms of trying to coordinate a lot of different layers within that, particular event. And that's one particularly that was so heavily reliant on volunteers. Is the multi-sport events. And
big time.
Yeah, I think that's probably the most formalised process where I've been through with a volunteer management system.
Yep.
We had a whole workforce team at Commonwealth Games with volunteer managers and, very structured recruiting process to become a volunteer. Once, obviously, they were chosen, it then was my role to manage them as a workforce day to day in terms of shifts and what they were doing within their shift and, making sure they had their meal vouchers and
of course.
breaks and checking their radios in and out. But
so that would have been the biggest interaction you would have had with volunteers in terms of big numbers and you.
Absolutely.
And I think one thing we're finding from this podcast, there's a consistent theme of the need to engage others because there's only one Bron and you can't be doing everything. Although I think you've probably been in a lot of situations before where you've needed to do everything. Less funding.
Some of the events I've done very much have to be across everything and do everything. And I think that one of the best things about the volunteer workforce that we have for Commonwealth Games is they were all highly skilled and experienced.
Yeah.
So that was one area where, I dabbled in basketball. I had never been involved with organising basketball. So we were heavily reliant on their skills and experience to sort of say, well, if we're running the score bench, how should we run it? And, if we've got the shot clock set and the warm-up times, at what order do we do that in? Now, we had staff within our team that were organising that, but when you're spread across 4 venues, we needed to rely on. So we had staff that came from Basketball Australia, Basketball Victoria, all the large associations all got involved. And that was, I think, what made our sport work at the Commonwealth Games was that volunteer workforce. It was incredible.
Yeah, sure. And I guess since then you've moved into roles with basketball, with softball, a little bit with tennis, and now with Com Games Australia. Across probably softball was a large portion of your career. Did you have much engagement with the volunteer or just see how they were involved even from basketball as well? Any impressions from your time there?
Yeah, I think the volunteers, if we talk about it from a very local perspective, is how I sort of see the
very
softball.
Different to the event level.
Very different indeed. And it's very much a huge part of people's lives. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one thing that is often forgotten about is that some people see them as sort of an expendable workforce. And if you take it away from them, you're actually removing, a big part of their lives. So through my softball days, just even playing and coaching, you would see people preparing the grounds and running the canteen and, all our umpires, obviously things have changed a little bit where a lot of umpires now are paid, which is good. They're a qualified workforce, so they should be. But, most of our coaches at local level are just volunteering their time because they love it and they want to stay engaged, particularly if you can't play anymore through injury or, your body's not quite there anymore. But, we recently had the National Under-16 Championships at Waverley Softball Association in the East. And we, obviously their committee were very heavily involved in organising the championships. But what was great and what shows that softball community in Victoria is strong is that we had volunteers come from other associations to help out and chip in.
Other sports?
No, other associations. So, Werribee might have sort of sent 2 or 3 people across, and there's no reason that they didn't need to do that or, we didn't sort of put the call out. They just wanted to help and get engaged and be involved. And we got feedback from, parents and athletes and coaches from other states to say that was one of the best national championships they'd been to for a while. It was because of the engagement of the volunteers. They were there every day with their shirts on, so they were seen, they were visual, they were there to help anyone, making sure the toilets were all ready, the canteen was stocked, all the grounds were immaculate. We're lucky we've got, there's always a brownie. We've got a brownie out of Waverley Softball Association that does a huge amount of work, unpaid work, to make sure those grounds are set. And again, you've got councils that are meant to, particularly do that. But if you take pride in your space, you want to go the extra mile. you have to rely on your volunteers. Softball doesn't have the money to pay groundskeepers. So
Is there any learnings from engagement with those volunteers about some things or systems or ways that you engage that others can learn from, you think?
Yeah, I think acknowledgement is huge. I think whether it's on the day, post-event, in the lead-up, any way that you can give them a pat on the back, and it doesn't have to be, in person. We can use social media these days to acknowledge our volunteers. We can do it by email, if you're doing an EDM. And it just gives them a bounce in their step to keep going and know that they're being recognised and it's been seen. I think being part of a workforce by uniform is a simple thing that people can do.
Sure. Yes, makes sense.
I think that makes you part of a team, and it means that, one of the things that often gets separated is workforce and volunteers. And I think if you can actually treat them as one cohort, actually make them feel better about themselves.
Yeah, that's been consistent as well through the podcast, is about the terminology of workforce. And God, you see it all the time. The Australian Open, we're involved with different things there, and the team, how they try and split them up or don't try and split them up in terminology. And some roles might be standing next to each other doing similar spots. One's getting paid, one's not. That's every event, right? So I think that engagement and incentive or reward or appreciation does go a long way.
And I think that appreciation part, reward and recognition is critical to volunteers, but obviously there are some that can afford, a structured reward program. I think a lot of sports can't. And
I understand.
There's other ways to do it.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we've got to be a bit more creative, whether it's a raffle where, they all go into a draw to win a gift card, it's still at least the thought's gone into saying thank you. So I think that's part of it as well.
And I think we have some people we work with around the world that use a point system for the amount of hours or shifts that somebody works, and a bit of a tally running. It's a permanent sort of reminder to the rest of the organisation who's actually putting in the hard yards, because your brownie that you mentioned, people aren't there on a Tuesday afternoon to see the work that he's doing or she. So it's important. Bron, it's been really, really awesome to hear a bit more about your journey. I've got a couple of questions that everyone is answering on the podcast, because I think there's some consistencies that we're finding here. And we've kind of covered a little bit, but why did you get into your role? And probably more importantly, why are you still doing it? Because as you mentioned, there was a fallback of PE. I think they're probably, let's face it, in COVID, it's tough times. Some people might be needing those fallbacks. Like, why did you get into it? But then why are you still doing this role in sports?
Yeah, I think, you often hear about if you find a job that you're passionate about, it feels less of a job. And I certainly feel like that's part of where I sort of fit within sport. I love to work on different projects, so I've never really pigeonholed myself in that respect. So I think that's why I've stayed relevant within the industry. I think that there's different levels of stress that we all thrive on too.
Yes.
I think that's where it's come in for me. I do really well in that environment where the pressure's on and you fix problems and you sort of, high five when something goes right and you fix it when it goes wrong. But that's certainly an element of where I think I've stayed within the sports industry and not gone off to other industries, because I think, it's a pretty common fact we don't get paid as much as other industries. And I think part of that is, it's a saturated market. Lots of people want to work in sport for the very reason that we love what we do. Not many industries where you feel as passionate about a particular area of your work that we do in sport. And I think for me, COVID's an interesting time for me. I had a business consulting that up until March was, done a bit of a brand refresh and was ready to head off on another path within the business. That all stopped completely with COVID.
Of course.
It was a tough time in that, I was, again, you sort of look at the fortunate things that happened. I was lucky enough to be a sole trader that was able to get JobKeeper, which kept me going. But, I sort of knew that long-term, the business in the current environment wasn't viable and I needed to look to other options. I'd like to think that in the future, when things settle down, the business might kick up and go again in a few years' time. But the job that I have at Commonwealth Games Australia is the manager of projects, planning and systems, which ticks most of the boxes that I've worked in the areas I've worked
absolutely
in.
So it does.
Pretty excited when I saw the position description come through for that. I went through the interview process and that was hard. I hadn't done a job interview in 13 years because I'd been in business. So
dust off the resume,
the sweaty palms and the dry mouth. And that was but that was good. We've got to take ourselves out of our comfort zone on a regular basis to continue to grow. And that for me was something that I sort of looked forward to. And, I'm pretty excited about my role going forward. we've got a pretty clear target of getting a team ready to go to Birmingham in 2022.
Yeah, great.
Commonwealth Games. And, I think it's pretty exciting, the team that we're going to build to sort of get us to that point, both the athletes but also the workforce. So it's a pretty exciting time.
Yeah, brilliant. And just on that with COVID, there's lots of our friends that have fallen on tough times with COVID and contracting and working events. I don't know if there's not necessarily advice that you'd have, but any suggestions given your career? You've probably experienced similar things across your journey, not because of COVID, but other reasons. Any thoughts for those people that are going through that at the moment?
Yeah, it's interesting. And then I think for the first half of, what we considered lockdown, there were no job opportunities coming through. And I think for everyone, it was pretty scary. And a lot of people lost their jobs, whether it would be reduced hours or made redundant. And that's a pretty scary prospect. We talk about already having a saturated market. Well, it's just been flooded with highly skilled.
Absolutely.
But what we are seeing is a lot more jobs coming up. I think this opportunity for sports to restructure has actually allowed them to sort of look at what they actually need for the business in the next couple of years. And I think there's, if people out there are unsure about what industry they want to work in or what role they want to work in, is spread the net far and wide. That would be my tip. Don't think that you only have to look in one particular area. There's a lot of jobs going on LinkedIn, not just on job sites. So making sure they're putting some searches in there for job opportunities, and look outside of sport as well. Maybe an opportunity to try something completely different. So my thing would be staying positive, because I think the minute you drop your head, you sort of, you can't go into an interview thinking, what if I don't get this job? What am I going to do next? Because it'll impact on the interview process. And being positive is easier said than done. We're all surrounded by four walls down here in Victoria. And I know the other states are doing much better than we are, but it's hard to stay positive every day. So finding a way to be positive, whether it can be the simplest thing of listening to some music, lots of people
go out for a walk,
to clear their mind. Might be, I've certainly got into my art a lot more. I'm doing a lot more painting and sketching.
There you go. Nice.
So things that I hadn't done for a really long time that I've back to it. So I think everyone needs to find the part in their life that they want to do to clear their mind so they can stay positive and stay optimistic.
Yeah, I think it's a really, really good way to look at it for sure. And don't be too proud in these moments.
And that's it, don't let ego get in the way. I think for me, I could have, I'd sort of spent a fair bit of time, energy and money on rebranding the business, and I could have stuck that path, could have been now in a situation where I may have missed out on a lot of opportunities because I hadn't sort of taken that step to job hunt. So
really important.
Yeah, I think it is important that people don't consider and ask for help too. It's that element of being proud. Bring someone up and ask for advice.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, really nice. Thank you. So next one, a bit of a curly one. Proudest, best, funniest volunteer engagement moment. Has there been a time where you've worked with volunteers?
I mentioned Browning, so that was one. I think, we sort of talk about volunteers that go well out of their way to take an opportunity, and probably one that happened quite recently for me was a young uni kid. We had the Victorian Sport Awards, and we had sort of students from 3 or 4 different universities, and he came from Geelong on the train late at night. I think our event finished at 10 or 11 o'clock at night, and he still managed to get himself home to Geelong. And I think it just showed that, there's often a lot of excuses that you hear from volunteers of why they can't take a shift or can't turn up. And I think that's a frustration that a lot of people have with this particular generation coming through. But a reminder
as well.
A reminder that there are a lot of students and a lot of kids, as I refer to them.
Come on.
Yeah. A lot of students out there that will actually go the extra mile, and they've got to be rewarded. And you remember those ones. And I think they're the ones that are going to have a great career. And I say to those students, I said, if you ever need me to be your referee, you put my name down.
Yeah.
To tell them to be employed by someone I know.
You're right. I think it's the random sporadic nature that is sports and events. You never know when you'll meet a Bron or someone just by moving some plates or doing something doing the extra miles or taking some initiative. It takes a lot for people to get into that space.
And we often talk about standing out from the crowd. We've got saturated market.
It's important, right?
Employment point of view, but it's the same with volunteers and internships and traineeships that, how does your resume stand out from others? And often it can be the name of the referee you put down. Like, it can be the simplest thing.
Totally.
So if you do really well at an event and that manager you worked with thought you were fantastic, ask them to be your referee.
Yeah. It can't hurt to ask. We had a guest on the podcast, Aidan Shaw, who just called someone randomly out of the blue to say,
Yeah,
hey, can I,
Yep.
you know, Aiden? Yeah,
Yeah.
awesome. He's a good character, Aiden. And he just called someone and said, hey, have you got a job for me? And by chance, they were like, yeah, good timing. Come down this afternoon for something. So it's those sort of things that, again, that don't be too proud in our industry. If you don't have the confidence or the ability to take a risk in that sense, which at the time probably feels like a risk, you don't stand out from the crowd. So I think that's important for any young volunteers or people trying to cut through, or contractors trying to find that opportunity at the moment, is to don't be afraid to put yourself out there, because not putting yourself out there is almost the worst thing you can do by just blending in with everyone else.
Absolutely. Leap of faith.
Yeah.
Leap of faith in any direction you can take it. Like Aiden's a perfect example of someone that does take those opportunities and always asks, can I do more? And I've worked with him too as a volunteer and as an employee, and he's fantastic. He's a poster child for any student going through uni to stick their hand up and have a go.
Yeah, and I'd say people like yourself, Bron, and others that you've worked with have all, in order to be in the position you're in, have done that, because you don't get to these positions without putting your hat in the ring and maybe punching above your weight sometimes. Which
again, we talk about the workforce, and we sort of haven't talked about opportunities for males or females, but I think that's one thing that
massively, you're right,
not put their hand up, whether they know they're highly skilled or not. I don't think it matters. And I think that's one thing to get through to a lot of young women coming through the sports industry, is you are capable and you just need to take those opportunities as much as anyone else.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's with our previous experience pre-Rostify with Event Workforce, it was always the young girls coming through that were the best. No doubt. The ones that actually took the chance at first were nervous to put their hand up and be involved. Once they got in, they were running the show and being our very best staff around the country who are now all doing incredible things. And it's so great to see them around the country in different roles and in leadership positions for other girls and young women, to see other people just like them in these positions that are hiring these. And that's, the more of this, the better, I think, Bron. So
there's opportunities now. Women's Sport Australia have got a great mentoring program. I know there's, I think, 2 new programs sort of focusing on female athletes, both young and existing athletes, around career transition. And I think those young women coming through need to look for those chances to join those programs and learn from not just women, but from men as well. We often have a lot of different mentors come through the program. But again, this is an opportunity to learn from people that have been through what you're going through and might get you the next job.
Big time. Yeah, couldn't agree more. Last one. What does success mean for you personally? And in regards to a volunteer program, what does success look like in a volunteer side as well?
Okay. Well, success for me is, that's a big one. I don't actually, I tell people to sort of think about their vision and going forward. And I think had you asked me 6 months ago, my success would have been solely around my business.
Yeah.
Now I'm on a different path. Success might be for me coming out of Birmingham and finding another role within this, space of whether it be CGA or AOC, and what opportunities might lie ahead for senior management roles there for me. I think that's the next phase of success in my career.
And if I can just stop you before we move on to the next one, it's maybe a deeper lying one, less perhaps about work, but success in terms of work to live to work kind of balance. It's we all try and find, and sports and working in sports and in events is tough to find that balance sometimes, but you're not doing it for no reason as well. So is there a success that's outside of just kind of the next job or anything like that as well, that you've kind of stayed consistent on or learned from as well?
Yeah, I think, getting deep here, we sort of ask ourselves, what's our purpose in life and why do we do things? And what makes us happy? Yeah. They're all pretty tough questions when you actually sort of push a bit deeper and go a bit harder on what the answer is.
Yeah.
I think for me, I'm a mum, got Chloe who's 8, and I think very much my purpose with my career is to make sure that we're financially stable, and then she has all the opportunities she could possibly need to succeed.
Yeah.
Whether that be, enough money for a mortgage in a nice area with nice schools, and she gets to, get tennis coaching because we've got a bit of money to pay for that, or piano lessons, and the list is endless when you talk about the activities for an 8-year-old. But
I'm sure, yes.
Yeah, I think, you talk about education, and it's really important, and the value we place on that. And I think in the next couple of years, we'll decide whether or not, there's private school opportunities or public school opportunities. And I think what's really important is that she has a great group of friends that keep her on her path. more so than the money you spend on an education. So
yeah, for sure.
But yeah, that's my level of success, is that, I can continue to work up the salary scale. Obviously I was probably more in control of that through the business, where I could
I understand that.
manage the contracts and bring in what I thought was the right amount of money. But that's probably where my success lies, is that earn the salary I think I'm worth, and
good.
have a nice happy life for Chloe and I.
Great. I think a lot of hopefully women listening can learn a bit from that as well, in terms of knowing your worth and having goals for those things. It's very important. I think that women in sport element, for me, I've just had a young baby girl. Evie's just turned 1. So I think the same thing about making sure that when they're old enough, that the opportunities are there for them as well. For me, as a male, I was lucky enough to have growing up and going through universities that perhaps women similar to me weren't able to, or secondly, didn't have the confidence to think they were able to, or have the worth to be involved with. And so I think that's definitely it's an interesting one that needs to evolve, and
making inroads with generational change. And I think
correct.
If you look at your generation opposed to your father's generation, very different.
Oh, big time.
Women's
massively.
goals are.
My grandpa's. Yeah.
The choice and opportunity that Chloe has available to her is very different to what I had growing up. And that's the biggest aspect that I focus on for making change, is give them the choice, give them the opportunity. Chloe might not want to play cricket, but at least she has the choice.
Absolutely.
Something that I was never sort of presented with growing up. And I think that we talk about traditional sports for women and men, and I don't think we're getting away from that now. It's just sport. The Australian women's cricket team, the Australian men's cricket team, sort of, getting closer and closer to sort of level pegging in terms of acknowledging their success and, highlighting the heroes of each team. And I think
the T20 World Cup at the G was a bit of a spectacle, wasn't it?
That was incredible. It was so good to be there. And, it's something I'll remember for the rest of my life, but I was able to take Chloe, and I'll be able to sort of remember
great.
that day.
Did she love it?
Yeah, she did. She thought it was incredible. 8-year-old's also pretty happy about Katy Perry, but
I was going to say Katy Perry's big shortcut.
She's at a good age where now she can watch sport and enjoy it and engage with it, so it's good.
Good fun. You've seen a lot of sport. Maybe if we just focus on club sport potentially, or national sport, what does a good volunteer engagement look like? We've touched on that they need to feel appreciated and welcome, and part of it is something. Is there anything further there around what does a good volunteer engagement strategy or incentive or program look like?
We need to look at it as part of any other element of our sport, and it requires planning. I think that you can't walk into an event or, your regular Saturday competition without thinking about, what do we actually need? How many bodies do we need to be there for this to come off? And what skill sets do we need? The same way you would plan for your workforce, you've got to plan for your volunteers. And I think that the biggest tip that I have with working with volunteers is respect. So many of them are treated poorly. You lose them instantly. And how you do that is probably up to each situation, in terms of, every volunteer is going to be a bit different with what, motivates them. For Brownie, it might be just that everyone knows his name on a Saturday afternoon, and he loves that, and that's his recognition. But others might need, more public recognition, and that's not being trying to put themselves out there. I think it's just nice that that happens.
One thing I do see in sports, and correct me if you think I'm wrong, but it often feels people are chasing their tails all the time. That every year you're coming around, you've got your major tournaments each year, but it feels like you're starting from scratch again. I don't know if you see that, or if you see if there's anything that can be improved to change that. Yeah,
I think that there's two elements that I think there's an issue, is that it seems to be the same people every year that put their hand up and help. And
correct. And when they're not there, what's happening? What's not even the 12-month strategy or process? What's the long term?
Again, that comes down to a bit of planning, but I think that's part of it too, is that, you get a bit of burnout with volunteers, and associations can literally fall over if 2 or 3 people walk away because they've just had enough, whether they're tired, not recognised, whatever it might be. I think that's a really big part of it too. I think around, how many people you use, or what skill set you need to, is an interesting one, around whether it be large scale or small scale, is really important as well. Yeah, and I think one of the things that's probably changed in more recent times is that most of the paperwork that we used to do for sporting clubs was in a folder, in a drawer, in someone's at least now most of it is online available.
Yeah.
The next committee member to come in and have access to it. So record keeping's been a big thing, I think, that's helped in this area. But again, you can stuff that up and someone might not access a password, or someone's filing system online is pretty appalling and you can't find the document you're looking for. So, that can be simple things that, and I'm talking probably more clubland there, where
clubland.
You need the next committee member coming in who's the treasurer to sort of see the last 4 or 5 years of financials and see how they, reconcile the bank statements or whatever it might be. So look, larger scale events, it's like project planning any other element of the event. There has to be a blueprint for the next one. You have to have key learning. If the next FIFA World Cup doesn't learn from the last one, then they'll make the same mistakes.
Yes, correct. And I think this is where systems, process and technology, the intersection of the three of those comes into it. But you and I could talk for another 4 hours about that, Bron. So we might wrap it up there. So Bron, thank you so much for joining us on the Engaged Volunteer. It's been great to have you on, and look forward to seeing how the Aussies go at the Com Games, hey?
No, fantastic. Thanks, Shannon. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today.
Yeah, good on you. Thanks, mate. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Engaged Volunteer podcast with Bron Parry. We hope you enjoyed it. Now, if this is your first time listening, then welcome. Our podcast aims to highlight the ways in which organisations and individuals are engaging their communities to connect them to events and causes they're passionate about, with new episodes released each Wednesday fortnight. The best way to support the Engaged Volunteer podcast is to click follow in your Spotify app or wherever you listen today, and of course tell your friends about us. On our final episode of Season 1 of the podcast, we are joined by Chris Randall, Regional Director of Ironman in New Zealand. Chris was an outstanding guest that provided some really insightful and thoughtful information on best practice for volunteer engagement. I especially loved talking to Chris about the ways team have brought a commercial value to their volunteer program that provides a win-win for his organisation, the sponsors, and most importantly for the volunteers. For me, I think the volunteer program is an incredibly underutilised asset in any organisation. So I hope this conversation gets some thoughts started on how to bring sponsors in to support the great work that you're doing. Now, more about Chris. Not many event professionals can say that their first taste of events was actually at the Olympic Games. But after a leap of faith and an impromptu career change, Chris did exactly that and hasn't looked back. Since his first role as a project manager at the Games, Chris has gone on to experience and enjoy the event's buzz at some of the world's premier mass participation events. During this podcast, Chris and I chat about how Ironman manages to engage with their volunteers year on year, including the strategies that they've implemented to combat cancellations and postponements as a result of COVID-19. Chris also shares his insights into Ironman's unique partnership program for volunteers, highlighting the ways in which sponsors can provide great opportunities to enhance the volunteer experience to increase engagement, retention, and overall volunteer satisfaction. I love this conversation, and I'm sure you will too. And we look forward to you joining us.